All right, good morning, everybody. We will get started since it's 10 o'clock. I really appreciate seeing so many of you joining today as we discuss some of the new changes to our accountability system and support. And as I think about our future and the future of our state, I'm just very excited that we have such a partnership with ESUs, and I look forward to working with you, getting to know more of you, and thinking of ways that we can all work together to improve the schools in our state. So again, I'm Lane Carr. I'm the Director of Accountability in AQuESTT, and I've been in this position now for about 2 months and have learned just an incredible amount and still have so much to learn. But I'm very excited for the new challenges as well as the new opportunities that we have, and especially to work with the great educators in our state, including you. So today we're going to be spending about 45 minutes or so just kind of talking about some of the changes and updates. These questions were submitted by you and your colleagues, as well as I'm hearing them from administrator days. I'm hearing them at, from people as I speak to different groups. And so I just want to take some time to really make sure that we're answering any other questions that you might have throughout, and especially as we get close to school, which it's crazy that we're almost there already. So some of the objectives that I have, first, to answer any questions that you had that were submitted via a survey that went out in about November. And we have waited and waited and finally got our ESSA plan approved in June. And so that has kind of been why we're waiting, because we want to make sure that we're communicating the most up-to-date information. So I'll definitely blame the feds here for that. And also take responsibility that we need to get this communicated even better. So a few of the topics that we're going to discuss, we'll talk about how we're going to classify schools in November and December. We'll share some information about changes to the EBA. We'll talk a little bit about chronic absenteeism, and I'll give you some resources that you can help support schools with chronic absenteeism or reducing chronic absenteeism. We'll talk about the different levels of designation for schools. We'll share some of our vision for support and improvement and how we're really going to need your partnership and work moving forward. Next, I'll provide a few resources for you that you can share and that you can investigate. And finally, we'll talk about some of the next steps and the help that I'll need from you as we move forward. So the first question that was submitted, or one of the first questions, was why do we need to change our accountability system in the first place? And so this is a good place to start because it provides a little bit of context. Really, we need to have an accountability system change because of 3 big buckets. The first is the Every Student Succeeds Act that we'll talk a little bit more in depth about. The next is our revised college and career readiness standards, as well as the assessments that go along with those standards. And the third is the Nebraska Education Vision and Direction, or otherwise known as the strategic plan of the State Board of Education. And it's actually pretty great timing that all of these things came at once. Yes, it's a little bit frustrating that there's so much going on, but it's also an opportunity to kind of just rip the Band-Aid off and make some of these big changes all together. So those 3 things, really driven by our mission to lead and support the preparation of all Nebraskans for learning, earning, and living, have kind of coalesced at a great time to get us into what we're calling AQuESTT 2.0. So this timeline is actually misleading because a lot of the work actually happened before March of 2018. We had stakeholder engagement sessions across the state during the ESSA process, and even before that in 2014 and 15 with the creation of AQuESTT. But in in March of 2018, we brought together a group of stakeholders, including ESU representatives, to really talk about the changes to our accountability system and also to try to gain some feedback and some approval for some of the recommendations that we're making for changes. If we go to the far end of this timeline, we look at the classification and designation. Those we're anticipating, that process we anticipate happen in November or early December. So with that classification of our excellent, great, good, and needs improvement schools, as well as the designation of schools for support. We're going to talk again about those in a little bit more detail. But you'll notice from that March date to November and December, there is feedback built in, stakeholder engagement built in throughout that, and communication. So what we're really hoping to do is just get this information out to schools, get this information out to ESUs, and also gain as much feedback as we can from you all. There's a lot of opportunities still for us to get feedback and take your feedback and make some changes. It's a tight timeline, I'm not going to lie. And we're very conscious of our capacity here at the department. So thinking of ways that we can leverage our partnerships with community groups and share out this information as best we can. So speaking of that communication, many folks have been asking how we're going to get this information out. So ESSA required, and also we just needed to do it because it hasn't been updated for quite some time, but we are redoing our education profile. So this is some mock-ups. These are some mock-ups of what that will look like. So these should become live in November again. And we recognize that that is very late, but we're, again, having so many things, kind of the confluence of so many things together are leading us to that tight and late timeline. But you'll see here that the first thing is the picture on the left shows what our classification page will look like. So a school at the very top will see their overall classification, and then we break it down by tenant and show what that will look like. Each school will also have a badge, or if they are recognized or designated for CSI or priority school status. We're going to talk a little bit more about those different designations. And then you will also see just a snapshot of data. This will be the homepage when every school opens it up. So this is a random school, and it shows the student membership. It shows information about programs and metrics and performance on our NSCAS assessments. This will be a one-stop shop for education data. So rather than have an education profile and an AQuESTT page, which, by the way, we heard from both ESU and our school colleagues that those were not helpful with the awkward arrows up and the weird arrows that show how a school moved. So we're trying to simplify it quite a bit by just presenting the information that a school, that a student, that a parent might need to know. So we had a question that was submitted about how will the indicators be weighted to rank schools. It's very important to note that AQuESTT does not rank schools. Instead, it uses a series of 4 ratings: excellent, great, good, and needs improvement. And this was how schools were designated or classified in the last go round in 2014 and 2015. So this isn't new, and our stakeholders are very adamant about not ranking schools. So with AQuESTT, I can't tell you what the 1009th school is in our state, and I can't tell you what our #1 school is in our state. And that's very important because there's a lot of competition at the top for #1 that really isn't good for students. And it's very demeaning to be in that lowest 5 schools, or the worst school in our state. We don't have any bad schools in our state. We have schools that need improvement. And that's really what we're trying to denote. That's really what we're trying to show with these classifications and our ratings rather than rankings. So speaking of, how are we going to identify schools for support? So very adamant from our State Board of Education and our commissioner, as well as stakeholders. It was confusing to have a state system and a federal system. So we did the best we could to try to create one system with 2 steps. So the first step will be the classification that we talked about. And the second will be the designation of schools for support. So the federal government requires 2 basic categories. We have comprehensive support and improvement, and targeted support and improvement. And these filter methods, these 2 triangles that you see, are detailed in greater, they have greater detail in future slides as well as in our ESSA plan. So let's talk about classification a little bit more. So the founders of AQuEST 4 or 5 years ago, the vision setters for AQuEST, really had in mind a broader, bolder, and better system. And they laid the foundation for us to get to that broader piece and had a lot of vision around what AQuEST could be and that it could be more than just test scores. Nationwide, we're seeing a push for different indicators that better tell a school's story, that move, again, beyond test scores. So our AQuEST system is basically at this point solely based on test scores. And the vision and what we're proposing here, and I'll blow this colorful sheet up in the next slide, but what we're building and what we're trying to create is a system that is based on the tenets of AQuEST. And that came loud and clear from our stakeholders in March. Let's align our accountability system with our system of support. Let's create a system that has indicators within each of these tenets. So the new indicators for this year, the ones that were written into our accountability system and are written into our ESSA plan, are chronic absenteeism, progress towards English language proficiency, and science. And what we've done is we've nestled each of those indicators and the ones that were already part of our system underneath a tenet. So in this slide, you can see that a little bit better. So I'll walk you through an elementary school example. So in elementary school and middle school, they will begin with proficiency status. So that is how a school scores on proficiency for English language arts and math. Based on that proficiency status, a school will be given a 4, 3, 2, or 1, which corresponds with the classifications. So excellent is a 4, great 3, good 2, 1 is needs improvement. So school gets that initial classification based on its status. Next, we're going to look at each tenet. So beginning with the assessment tenet, we're going to weight together. We're going to make an index and build together growth, improvement, non-proficiency, and science, both science status and science score improvement. And based on that outcome, we're going to award either a +1, a 0, meaning a school wouldn't get a classification change, or if the school regresses, we'll actually get a -1. For educational opportunities and access, the dark blue tenet, here we are only rewarding schools. There's no negative here. It's a +1 or a 0, and that was really
a mini conference room.
That was really based on our I'm gonna mute here. Perfect. Okay. That was, and then I'll open up for questions in the future. This was really based on our stakeholder feedback. So there were a lot of concerns about chronic absenteeism and progress towards English language proficiency. So in response to that, we have equally weighted those together, and we've only made progress towards reduction in chronic absenteeism and progress in English language proficiency. Those can only be rewards for schools. Schools will get credit for doing well on those two indicators. So after a school gets its proficiency score and gets a bump or does not, or goes down from assessment, or gets a bump or does not from educational opportunities and access, that provides a raw classification, which is the same way that we have done it in the past. Next, the EBA is applied. So schools that are eligible for an EBA bump, we will look at some of their evidence, and we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about what that looks like and what that means. And a school will then either get the EBA bump or will not get the EBA bump, that +1 classification adjustment. You'll see the EBA does not count against a school. It is only positive. And from that, we get our final classification. So the maximum score that a school can receive is a 4, which corresponds with the excellent classification. So what's cool about this is that it sets us up. You'll notice that transitions, positive partnerships, college and career readiness, and educator effectiveness do not have any indicators in them. And that means that the world is really our oyster, and that we can create and develop a system that we want and that best tells the story of our schools. And so we'll be looking to you and your ESU colleagues to help us vision what that could look like in the future. One question that we continue to get is, are there PLAS schools? Are there federal PLAS schools and schools that are persistently low achieving? And the answer to that is simply no. We've now created a different category or a different classification. So ESSA requires the identification or the designation of comprehensive support and improvement. That's what CSI stands for, comprehensive support and improvement, and targeted support and improvement. Comprehensive support and improvement are the lowest 5% of Title I schools. They are high schools with graduation rates below 67%, and they are schools with consistently low performing subgroups. Those comprehensive support and improvement schools will be identified in November or December. And we'll let those schools know ahead of time. We'll let the ESUs where those schools reside know as well. Targeted support and improvement is all about subgroup performance. So while there is no AYP in ESSA, there are subgroup accountability is present with the targeted support and improvement category or designation. So this will begin in 2019, and this is schools with consistently low performing subgroups. So there are 10 subgroups, the 7 racial and ethnic groups, as well as economically disadvantaged, English learners, and students with disabilities. And what we'll do is we'll create a list of schools. We'll identify or designate schools for each of those subgroup categories. It's really important to note that beginning in 2019, schools with targeted support and improvement, or that have been identified for targeted support and improvement, cannot be excellent schools. That's just a philosophical change that we decided on here. As we push to be champions for equity, we believe that if all of your students and all of your student groups are not benefiting equally, then you cannot be an excellent school. So how do we identify those comprehensive support and improvement schools and the targeted support and improvement schools? Like I said, we do not rank our schools. So when the feds say, show us the lowest 5% of schools, it's hard for us because I can't look at those 87 needs improvement schools and tell you which most need improvement. So what we did is we borrowed a system for identifying those schools from Minnesota. So this is an example of how we're going to use this filter, as we call it, to determine our comprehensive support and improvement schools. And I know many of you have heard this and seen this from me before, but I just don't think I can communicate it enough to you and to our stakeholders and make sure that everybody has at least a general understanding. So if you've heard this before, I'm sorry, bear with me. There's going to be some new things hopefully soon. And I wish I could see your faces to see if you're smiling right now. I hope you are. We'll start off with 495 Title I schools. So that's our first pool, that initial pool at the very left of this diagram. Then we'll take the lowest quarter of Title I schools in status, so their ELA and math proficiency. And we'll take that lowest quarter and move it on to stage 2. We'll also take the lowest quarter of schools for English language proficiency, so progress towards English language proficiency. Put another way, we'll take the lowest performing schools that are not making progress, essentially, for their students in English language proficiencies. Lots of double negatives going on there. The schools that are making the least progress towards English language proficiency, and we'll move them to stage 2. We heard loud and clear from our stakeholders that progress and growth for students should count more in our system. And so we responded by putting stage 2 as our measures of academic progress. So we had 495 schools initially. We've now whittled it down to about 200 schools in stage 2. In stage 2, we're going to take the lowest quarter of schools in improvement, that 3-year trend in student achievement. We're going to take the lowest quarter of schools for growth, that is student by student growth from year to year, and non-proficiency. So is a school reducing its percentage of non-proficient students over the years? We're going to take the lowest 25% of those and move them to stage 3. We started out as 495 students, moved to 495 schools, moved to 200 schools in stage 2, and finally in stage 3 now we have about 75 to 80 schools entering stage 3. Here, we're going to combine the school quality and student success indicators of the EBA, science, and chronic absenteeism. Again, we heard from our stakeholders that we wanted chronic absenteeism to be as little weight as possible. So we've stuck it at the end, and we've combined it with the other 2 school quality and student success indicators to limit the amount of weight that it has. So we'll combine those, and from that 75, we will get about 25 to 30 schools that are identified for support. In this case, comprehensive support and improvement. We'll use a similar method to identify schools for targeted support and improvement in 2019. So one question that we had from folks was, how does student group performance affect classification or designation? The answer is that it currently does not affect classification. So AQuESTT classification does not hold accountable schools for student group performance. Now in 2019, it will with targeted support and improvement. So again, we talked about the 10 subgroups, and really that word subgroup needs to be changed to student group, because sub, I think, denotes below, and that's really not what we're trying to discuss here. So the 10 student groups you can see there as well. And we'll begin identifying those schools for targeted support and improvement in 2019. There's a lot of conversations around equity in our state, and there's a lot of work happening about being culturally competent educators, understanding the needs of students, being trauma-informed practitioners. And so we're going to need your help continuing that conversation, especially in 2019 when we begin identifying targeted support and improvement schools. Great. So we've heard a lot about the EBA and the changes that are coming to the EBA. And one question was, what is happening? So there's currently some concern about the reliability or the perceived reliability of the EBA. And just in an effort to improve our AQuESTT process and continuously improve and listen to stakeholders, we have decided to make a few changes. So as I mentioned, schools eligible for the EBA, that's really important to note. It's not all schools. It's only schools that are eligible for their EBA adjustment will submit documented evidence to us in the fall. So we're thinking it's going to be about 110 schools that we will ask to submit documentation of their responses. So I was asked at Administrator Days what this evidence could look like, and I did not mean to be glib, but it kind of came out that way. Basically, what we are expecting is whatever evidence you were considering or a school was considering when answering the question, that's the evidence we want to see. So that may be policies and procedures, could be memos or letters, could be email correspondence or photos or sign-in sheets. Once we have that evidence, once we get that from those schools, it's going to be reviewed by a panel of experts from ESUs, NDE, and school district. And essentially what we're going to do is complete the EBA again, using the evidence that was submitted. So our panelists, I think two or three will be reviewing each school. They will answer the EBA as if they are that school. And they will look at the submitted evidence. And then to receive the actual bump, to receive the actual adjustment, there has to be agreement between the raters and the school. So we'll run some tests for inter-rater reliability. And if there's sufficiently strong agreement, then that school will get the bump. We have some resources that I think should help schools do this. There's a lot of concern about recreating the wheel or this being onerous. We have some alignment documents that I will show you that could be helpful as schools do this in the fall. They may be reaching out to you, and I can show you where some of those resources are. Again, we think this is just a good way to improve the EBA, get some new data, get some new evidence, and then address the concerns around perceived reliability. Somewhat along those same lines, there's a lot of discussion and a lot of questions about how we can make this smoother for schools. And I definitely hear that. How can we align AQuEST, ESSA, and school improvement? So there's a lot of things going on this slide. This is a poorly constructed slide because there's a ton of information. But I want to share with you some of the resources that we're putting together. So first, we've created a Telling Your Story document on our website. Now, I will go to the website at the end of this to show you where that is. But basically, this is a step-by-step tutorial on how schools can use the data that they see to tell the story of what's happening at their school. As I mentioned, we have an Advanced Ed and AQuEST crosswalk. So our friends at Advanced Ed created a crosswalk for us that shows the alignment between EBA items and Advanced Ed framework. And so that's a very exciting resource that they put together for us. And then furthermore, I would like to point out to you that I think we can use the EBA as a really strong source of data to look at trends and focus resources. So you all should have received an email from me, at least the administrators should have received an email from me that contained the most up-to-date EBA data for the schools in your service area. And just some high-level trends that we're already seeing from the EBA. It's such a powerful tool when we can see this. First, needs improvement schools are asking for support for partnerships and partnerships with community groups. Across all classification levels, there's a need and a desire for support in digital learning and technology to support teaching and learning. We also see an equity piece reflected here with the support and management of learning for all students. So again, such power in looking at this data across the state and ways that you as ESU leaders can target those resources, can target that professional development, as we as a state can focus our time and attention at those continuous improvement sessions and school improvement activities, and et cetera. Again, we can look at some more data with the Advanced Ed state averages with the Elliott. These were 3 trends from the 2016-17 school year, and you see some alignment, right, with equitable learning, high expectations, and digital learning. You see at the top of this slide, there's that pretty broad statement that accountability equals continuous improvement. That's something that is a nationwide push and something that I am trying to embody as well. I definitely did not get into this job to label or to shame schools because I don't think that that is helpful. What I do think is helpful is creating opportunities for actionable data to lead to continuous improvement. And so I want your help, if you would, to share this message that accountability is more than just a label or getting money or resources. It's about continuous improvement and reflecting the story of a school. You can tell I'm passionate about this work right here. So very quickly, don't get too caught up in what you see here on this. This is just an example of where we are kind of looking into the future. So as I mentioned, we've set ourselves up for being able to really create what we want in an accountability system. And so we're going to be looking to you for help in this process. So as we look to broaden our accountability system, can you imagine a college and career readiness indicator that gives schools credit for industry certification or concentrator completion in a program of study or access to AP, IB, and dual credit? What if we included teacher absenteeism as one of the measures for educator effectiveness? How about a 9th grade on track or early warning indicator in our transitions? There's so many things that we can do, and you can see arts and PE. Georgia has a really cool indicator called Beyond the Core, and that's all about student access to PE, arts, and music. So we can build the system that we want, and this needs to be happening soon. So if you have ideas on this, I would love to hear your thoughts, concerns, questions, but also just your partnership in hearing from schools and your partnership in building out the system into the future that we want. So there were 2 questions that I want to focus on now. Two questions that came actually pretty close to one another in the full report. So first, what role do you believe ESUs will play in implementing the ESSA plan? And is there a written plan for how NDE expects ESUs to provide support? So there is no written plan for how the NDE expects ESUs to provide support. Instead, I would love for us to be able to discuss that into the future. I would love to talk about just a little bit of some of the work that I foresee ESUs providing support, and just the invaluable work that you do on the ground with our schools every day. So first, I want to point out needs improvement schools. So when I was at Administrator Days, I heard from 3 separate administrators who said to me, we've been on the needs improvement list and we didn't get a call, we didn't get resources, we didn't get anything or really know what to do. And so I take that really personally as what do needs improvement schools get? What is the additional support that we provide to our needs improvement schools? And here's where I think that I can do a better job communicating those schools, communicating their needs with you, and then partnering with you to think about how we can provide those supports and services to needs improvement schools. We're going to talk in the next several slides about what happens after a school is designated, and there's absolutely a role for ESUs, an invaluable role for ESUs in the support of our comprehensive support and improvement schools. Just a couple of things. One of the things that I really want you to be focused on is this idea of evidence-based interventions. So in the past, to receive federal money for interventions, it was research-based interventions. Now we want it to be evidence-based interventions. So can we actually show that the project, the intervention, the program that we are about to implement has evidence that backs it up? So those are things that if an ESU is providing services to schools that are comprehensive support and improvement schools, it's very important that they are evidence-based interventions. And then the last thing that I think is that I have been really excited to see is this idea of consortia. So how are we working? How are we leveraging your regional abilities to lead and transform schools, to create cohorts of learners, to focus resources in a better way? And so those are the kinds of things that I think we should be thinking about together and continue thinking about. And we'll look to your leadership to really come up with some of those ideas. So I do want to talk to you just a little bit about these support for improvement funds. This is after a school is designated as comprehensive support and improvement. What happens? What's next? And that's the part I'm most excited about, is building out that what's next. So there are no longer school improvement grants or SIG grants. Instead, these are support for improvement funds. And it will follow this process: designation, comprehensive needs assessment, a progress plan, and finally the application of funds. We're looking at about $5 million, which is a lot of money, but it's going to go fast when we have 25 to 30 schools for comprehensive support and improvement. So just to dig into that process a little bit more, each comprehensive support and improvement school will be asked to submit a comprehensive needs assessment, or to work through a comprehensive needs assessment. This is being built, this comprehensive needs assessment is being built by partners from ESUs, NDE, districts, as well as the regional education laboratories centered in Denver. So we're trying to identify the sources of information that should go in here. We're looking at the minimum expectations that we should include, and it really digs down to that root cause analysis. So what is causing low student achievement? What is causing chronic absenteeism? What is causing all of these pieces that are being brought into our accountability system? So after a school is designated as comprehensive support and improvement, they will then proceed with an improvement plan. So this must be informed by all indicators, has to include stakeholder engagement, and must include evidence-based interventions. It has to look at resources and how those are applied, and then it must be approved by the school LEA and SEA. So we have a comprehensive needs assessment, which leads to an improvement plan that will be approved by the school, the district, and the state. And finally, those schools have the opportunity to apply for funds that will support the implementation of their progress plan. So as we have it written, schools demonstrating the greatest need will receive the funds first. The criteria for school improvement and how schools are asked to improve will align with the tenets of AQuESTT. And it has to include community and educational partners. So that could include ESUs and nonprofits. It must include evidence-based interventions. We cannot fund, federal funds cannot be used if they do not show evidence that these are evidence-backed and evidence-based interventions. So that's where I think you guys could be providing a lot of support to your schools, is what is this evidence-based interventions, what works in schools, and how can we apply that across the board. So just that's a lot of information, and this process of creating all of this is still in the works. So designation, we're working on those business rules right now. Our comprehensive needs assessment is being built as we speak. The schools will develop this progress plan, and then each school for comprehensive support and improvement will apply for these funds. So throughout that process, throughout all of those pieces, there's a role for you to play. Another question that we had to kind of change subjects a little bit, and then I also want to make sure I'm providing enough time to open it up for questions. So one question that we had was, how does the ESSA plan support principal effectiveness? Great question, and we actually have an entire section devoted to quality educators and the recruitment and development and retention of quality educators. So this has to do with Title II funds. And in our section 5 of our ESSA plan, we talk about how schools should be using that Title II funding. But what I'm really excited about is this ESSA Learning and Leadership Collaborative that Nebraska has been part of, a small group of states leading in this work. So what we have in our ESSA plan is that we're going to use the funding to focus on principal preparation, focus on principals as instructional leaders, and really build out the capacity of our leaders in our schools. So at our board meeting this Friday, the board will be considering the approval for an ELLC coordinator, and this person would be in charge of leading this group, leading a small group of principals in this capacity building and accelerating of the expertise of both superintendents and principals, as well as principal supervisors. So I'm really excited about the conversation around principals and school leaders and how we can really leverage that touch and that influence to make some changes in our lowest performing schools. So I want to provide you a couple of quick resources that I think you may be interested in. So the first is this evidence for ESSA. So as I mentioned, any intervention that is supported with federal dollars must be evidence-based. This Evidence for ESSA website has great intervention resources for ELA and math that are aligned to the ESSA evidence requirements. I also talked to you about chronic absenteeism and the resources available for chronic absenteeism. I would really suggest that you investigate some of those resources at attendanceworks.org. It's a national organization that has great resources on root cause analyses. It has strategies for engaging parents and community leaders and churches and nonprofits in the work of getting kids to school. We're going to go to our AQuESTT website, and I'll show you a few additional resources there. And then the last two sources here are from the Great Plains Equity Consortium. They are an awesome organization. If you have not checked them out, they do some great things. It's the Midwest and Plains Equity Assistance Center and Great Lakes Equity Center, and it's centered out of Indiana. but they do just incredible work with providing resources, again, on this topic of equity and what does it look like to be a culturally competent teacher? What are resources that students who have been historically underserved need to succeed in our schools? So I would recommend you check out both of these. You can also just go to greatlakesequity.org, greatlakesequity.org, and again, some great resources. So a few of the next steps. I had a great webinar with some administrators this morning, and I'm so glad to have some time with you today. I will also be having another webinar with school administrators tomorrow in the afternoon and trying to catch as many as we can. We're taking this on the road and speaking with some advocacy groups, including NCSA and SEA and NASB. We spoke with MOEC and are continuing great conversations with the Omaha education leaders there. We also have meetings set up with NERCSA and several advocacy groups that are nonprofits that are working really hard with specific student populations. So we had a great conversation with the Urban League last week. We're excited for their partnership, as well as the Latino American Commission, and how we can leverage both of those groups, their networks and their expertise to provide schools some supports for helping students that have been historically underserved. On the technical development side, we are busy working on our business rules. And those are kind of how we take the data that comes in and we smash it together, and the math behind getting us the classifications. Throughout all of this process, we've had independent reviewers. So we had some critical friends from CCSSO that helped us review our designation business rules. We're also going to be looking at having our business rules checked independently by a psychometrician as well as an in-house psychometrician. And we will be sending out those business rules for review from a couple of key education stakeholders as well. So tons and tons of work happening right now. And I'm just so glad that you would take time here today. We have about 15 minutes left. And I had you muted, so I'm going to unmute you all. And if you want to ask a question, feel free to stay on and ask a question. Here's my contact information. One thing that I am glad to do, I have in the past come to ESUs or have zoomed in to ESUs. I'm very glad to do that with your staff if that would be helpful. Spoke a couple of weeks ago in Auburn to new superintendents and to superintendents groups. Very happy to do that as well. And at any point, please just email me or give me a call at that number that you see there. And if you're on Twitter, please follow me there as well. And with that, I would love to open it up to any questions. If you would, just identify yourself and then share out your question, and I'll be glad to either answer it now or follow up with you in the future. Any questions? I just did that great of a job, huh? Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you all, and I appreciate the work that you do. And as we get started in this next school year, please just let me know at any point if there's anything that I can do to support you and your work in schools. Please feel free to reach out to me at any point with questions. And like I said, I'm really glad to speak with you and your team, your board, your superintendents, however I can help share this message out. And if there are no questions, then I think we will go ahead and end this session. I really appreciate you all spending some time with me today. Thank you all.
Well, I'm excited.